Founded in 1991, the Amerindian Peoples Association, APA, has long worked to defend the rights of indigenous communities in Guyana while supporting their social, economic, political, and cultural development. From the start, the APA has taken a strong stance against the exploitation of indigenous lands by large-scale mining and logging operations, as well as human rights abuses, among them incidents of police brutality. Now, more than 3 decades later, the organization says Indigenous people's right to self-determination, especially in matters relating to their ancestral lands, is still being ignored. But the government has pushed back, accusing the APA of acting as a political proxy for the opposition. This week on Sources, we speak with the APA President Mario Hastings and the Executive Director Jean LaRose about the ongoing fight for Indigenous rights, the current state of land governance, and the controversy surrounding allegations of political bias. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Sources. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Tonight, we'll be speaking about our First People and placing significant focus on the indigenous communities within Guyana, their success stories, but also their challenges. Tonight, we will be speaking with the president of the Amerindian Peoples Association, Mr. Mario Hastings, and also the executive director of the APA, Ms. Jean LaRose. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastings, tell us a bit about the APA. What are some of its goals and objectives?
Okay, thank you. APA was birthed because of the violations that the indigenous people were facing many years back, and the objectives of the organization is to advocate for the rights of indigenous people in general, their social issues, their economic, and the human rights, education, so forth. And from then on to now, we have progress. We have done a lot of work, but we still have a lot more to do, as you're aware that we still have some issues that we have to deal with at this current time.
We'll definitely talk about those issues.
Yeah.
Let me bring you in, Mr. Jean LaRose. Walk us through the progress made over the years and the battles fought by the APA since 1991 when the organization was established.
Yes, thank you. I hope I can do justice to that question. But the APA started out very small, and we're not very huge at the moment either. But it was as a result of a number of, especially human rights violation issues being faced by indigenous communities, which were many. Police brutality, and then later on violation of our indigenous people's land rights became a topical issue, especially when our interior started opening up to multinational investment, and therefore we had a lot of mining companies and timber companies coming into Guyana. So moving from just basic human rights violations in relation to police brutality and a number of things like that, the issues became a lot heavier in terms of rights violation, especially land rights. And indigenous peoples in Guyana and throughout the world have, over decades, over centuries in fact, been struggling with land rights when, from the time colonization took place. We have had battles with the various forces because of the incursions and the violations of our rights. And therefore, land rights has formed the basis to a large extent of the work of the Amerindian Peoples Association over the years. Mining has been an issue since its inception. Logging has been an issue, an incursion on indigenous land, and environmental issues, and sometimes social issues as well. And those continue to be issues that the organization have been dealing with. They've changed sometimes, um, uh, but those continue to be largely some of the issues that we have been facing. The APA also took on a lot of policy and legislative reform issues as well. So I participated in the constitutional reform process in the early 2000s. And as a result of that, there are some provisions in the national constitution because of the work that the APA did collaboratively with others, but also because of what the community said they wanted to see. In fact, our communities wanted a chapter in the constitution. We didn't get that. We got Indigenous Peoples Commission and with certain provisions, and then we got certain mention in different parts of the constitution as well. We also participated in the revision of the Amerindian Act. In fact, pushed and promoted the revision of the Amerindian Act. Therefore, in 2006 when it was passed, it was largely as a result of the work done by the APA. The 2006 Act did not fulfill all the wishes that the communities want, and therefore almost immediately the APA and others continue to push for further revisions. And that is very much an issue that Indigenous communities have been saying they want, or even if they have not been saying that, it is very much an issue that needs to be addressed in light of the continued struggles we face with land rights. But then there are other issues now that we have to deal with: carbon sale, oil, and the rest of it. So it becomes a lot more imperative that the Amerindian Act, and in fact other legislation that have implications for Indigenous peoples, the Environmental Protection Act, the State Lands Act, the Mining Act, and so forth, it is imperative that these legislation are reformed and take into account protection of Indigenous peoples' rights. We don't want legislative reform that takes us further down the sinkhole. So that is something that we have to be very, very careful and about as well.
When you speak about violations to Indigenous people's land rights, help me understand what are some of the communities that are significantly affected by these violations. Cite examples and the impact on the people. Mr. Hastings, you could add in there, but we'll start with Ms. LaRose.
All right, so let me take you to the 1976 Amerindian Act, the revised version of the 1976 of the Amerindian Act in 1976, where schedule to the Act described certain areas in which Indigenous communities were to be titled. So based on those descriptions, which some of them were faulty, by the way, so that's one of the first violations we see there. But based on those descriptions, Indigenous communities moved to have their lands titled, getting official certification, getting the paperwork done for those lands. It took a while, and it has been taking a while for the communities to have their lands titled, to have their lands demarcated to the extent that they want. And I must say here now, it's not true, as has been said in some circles, that the APA does not want Indigenous communities to have their land rights. That's far, far, far from the truth. We would like to see our communities have their land rights resolved to the extent that they understand it, to the extent that they know that it protects traditional occupation and use, that it protects traditional rights. The Amerindian Act does not talk about traditional rights, and that is something that should be included there. So we have had, in some cases, poor issues of demarcation, which I know the government has been trying to fix in some instances, but enough has not been done to poor demarcation. In some cases, erroneous descriptions to titling. In some cases, communities losing parts of their land because of those very poor demarcation and so forth. And then you have communities, some of them have been granted titles, and this is not the end of the list. but some of them have been granted titles with multiple mining concessions on them. So if you take the Isenru village, for example, at one point they were like about 80% covered in mining concessions, as much as they had an area of land. That total area of land was not a healthy piece of land that they eventually had title to. And you have other communities, Omanaikin, the Upper Mazruni, and you have Chinese Landing, another very community that's very topical, that have issues dealing with mining concessions on their land, or you have cases where traditional lands have not, some areas of traditional lands have not been included in title. So, you know, that is one area that communities still need to be focusing on and need to be addressed as well.
Mr. Hastings, what are the challenges faced by communities in the absence of a title? And you could also address the issue of logging and mining. Is it that the indigenous communities are not in support, or they want to ensure that they must play a key role in deciding who comes, who goes, and ensure that environmentally it is safe?
All right. I would say that it is very important to have the title of these villages so that you can have the proof to say that you have ownership, even though a lot of indigenous people, they're not really happy about the laws of this country. I'm referring to like the Amerindian Act, because the concern of the people have always been that they were here first. So regardless of whatever law that they have, they consider themselves being here and that they should be respected. In fact, our people usually say that it should be the indigenous people who should grant others lands, but it is not like that. So some of the impacts that would definitely affect indigenous people without a title is by the agency of the government, for example, GGMC, who would grant concessions on these title lands. And my village is a good example. A lot of villages in my district, Upper Mazruni, I would give Kako as an example. We received title in 1991, and we have an issue with that. We did not have a plan when that was given, and so concessions were granted on these titled areas without our consent. And that is very insulting to us as indigenous people, because if we are the owners, as the government continues to claim, you know, they like to boast about, you know, indigenous people are the second group of people who own large areas of land. But when we talk about ownership, full ownership, to have full ownership, you must have that authority to control what is happening on your land. But that is not the case. And so they continually grant concessions without including the people. People do not have participation in these discussions. And so it is only at a later stage when these concessionaires or the miners would enter the lands that they would meet with the people and inform them that, you know, we have our blocks, we have to go on the ground to do our surveys, whatever. And that is where these disputes would arise. And going further, when they should start to do their mining activities, that is where a lot of the destruction would come. Like, for example, Kaku, it is situated about a mile from the mouth of the river, and they have mining blocks or concessions way up the river. And if any time mining activities would happen in that area, all the water pollution that would be flowing would affect the communities. And it is good to know that with mining comes other social issues, like a lot of consumption of alcohol, substance abuse by young people, marijuana. It is very rampant now in the villages, in the whole of Upper Maz and in other regions. I'm not ashamed to say that. and diseases like malaria because of mosquitoes infestation, typhoid, dengue. So all of these things are issues that our indigenous people face. So even though it is good that it brings money, you know, we've heard that that is how the country earns its income to manage the country. But even though it is said so, um, it cannot be done at the risk of indigenous people's life because we believe that constitutionally we have a right to safe and clean environment, but all of these are violated, I would say, because I would continue to add that I had an experience where I was taken to court, if you can remember, and that was my argument, you know. It's a violation of our rights. I feel that we the people feel that the environment is very important to us. Our health is important. The well-being of our people is important. So we cannot make that sacrifice at the risk of our indigenous people. And yes, our people do involve in mining, I should say, but not the majority. But it's a form of livelihood. We don't really do it on a big scale, and so this has been a concern. We've had these discussions, back and forth discussions about we cannot be involved in mining while complaining about others who are doing the same thing. But it is something that is very difficult because our people don't really have any other form of employment in the areas except for subsistence farming and things like that. So when we think about other alternative means of getting income, this is where we have ventured into new areas like ecotourism, and we see that as a great move where we can have these lands in its intact state and still earn some money by venturing into this kind of activities. So that is what I can say at this time.
Ms. LaRose, what would you say would be, in addition to what Mr. Hastings would have said with regards to how do the indigenous community move forward with the dealing with the extractive industries? What recommendations, what proposals, and have you engaged the government? Mr. Hastings also spoke about GGMC and the role it plays in issuing mining licenses and so forth. What would be the ideal structure from an APA perspective?
So I know that there are some communities who have been contemplating, have been talking about, and have actually discussed at length with their groupings of communities as to what they would want to do in relation to mining and in relation to protection of their lands. The South Rupununi communities, the South Rupununi District Council, I know, have been working for a number of years to put systems in place to protect their lands. So they are looking at areas of different use, including cultural use as well. So they've done a lot of studies. The authorities need to work with, and they need to work, it's vice versa, with the authorities, but they need to be given the ear. They need to be given the time to explain, based on this work that they have done, how it is that they want to move forward, how it is that they can use the information and the plans that they have developed for their lands that can improve the conditions of the communities. So the SRDC is one model. Sorry. The SRDC is one model, and other communities, and I think including Mario's grouping of communities as well,
Yeah.
have been thinking about how can they use that similar model to also have plans towards protection of their lands. But like I said, it has to be one where the agencies work with the communities, understand that they have things that could work. Understand that not everybody who comes with a piece of paper from a university carries all the knowledge, that the communities have the knowledge that can be very, very useful for protection as well. So that is a door that needs to be open, to recognize that we have technical expertise. It may not be the ones with the PhDs and what behind their name, but they have the knowledge, they have the skill, and they have the experience from the communities. So those, I think those are good models that can work. The government also has to work with communities where there are mining concessions on indigenous lands to get those concessions off their land. They have been largely destructive to the environment, and as Maria pointed out, the social conditions of many of the communities. They have to work to get those concessions out of their land. They have to not grant those concessions close or on indigenous lands, including traditional lands. And you might wonder, what am I talking about when I say traditional lands? Traditional lands is the lands that we have occupied, used and occupied from time immemorial. Some of those lands have been titled to us, some have not been titled, right? And especially where it's not titled and where we have farming and hunting and other resource use areas, those need to be off limits as well to extraction. I mean, the recent case of Jawala, where mining is taking place on their land and destroying their burial sites and other areas, is a good example of why authorities need to listen to the communities and work with the communities as well.
Now, the AP has also been at the front calling for the full implementation of the free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC. How does that look in practice, in reality, on the ground when it comes to developmental initiatives put forward by the government, but also private citizens, investors, and companies?
So FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, means exactly that. Communities give their consent to activities taking place freely, with full information, and with time to make decisions as well. There is a FPIC steering group, I'm not sure that I'm calling the right name, that is working at the moment, that is being led by the National Tushaus Council. And that's a good initiative. But FPIC is not made for indigenous communities. It's not for a miner to come and say, hey, you must practice FPIC, indigenous communities. It's for the indigenous community to tell the miner, you have to practice FPIC. Here are our conditionalities for practicing FPIC. Right? So it's the other way around. Right now, you get the feeling it's being seen as something imposed on indigenous communities, rather for indigenous communities to use, to say, hey, here is how we want the environment protected. Here is how much you give back towards restoration. Or here is how we do not want the social issues to be affected. Here is how we want information to come to us in long enough time for us to understand, for us to be able to contract our technical support, independent technical support, to understand what you are bringing to us. Especially if we talk about large-scale mining, for example. Mercury has been used in the medium and small-scale sector for decades, but now you hear more talk about cyanide. Again, if our communities don't understand the implications of cyanide use, that's information very necessary on the FPIC. If they don't understand the implications of cyanide use, they could very well find themselves in difficulties and could go ahead and give a permission for an activity to take place without realizing that they are jeopardizing the community and so forth. So information is very, very key. for communities to assist communities in decision making.
Is there an example of communities being fed half-baked, as we would say, information that resulted in significant challenges for them, or does it happen?
It has happened in the past. I think you're aware of the cyanide, the Omai cyanide spill. That is an example. But I'm aware of, like, especially in the Deep South area, not very recently, but I'm aware of where very voluminous documents were given to communities in very short space of time to make a decision on mining in that very area that is being plagued by mining now. How can a community, you can give Jean LaRosa community, and I've been working on Indigenous issues for over 3 decades now. You can give me a very voluminous document, and that is not my area of expertise. I would not know how to begin reading it. So that's where it's important that we have our technical expertise. And if you bring that document at 9 o'clock in the morning when you show up and finish your meeting at 11, it doesn't make sense. That has happened in some instances.
You think it's just a formality?
It's just a formality. We tick off a box and we've done that. Environmental impact assessments are very, very important. They don't happen. They don't happen.
We've spoken quite a lot about mining and logging, the extractive industries. But when the APA was formed, it dealt largely with human rights, as you articulated. Last year, during a press conference, a group of Indigenous leaders spoke about some of the social issues and the issues of abuse, issues of leaders, regardless of which side they sit on, abusing their power when it comes to Indigenous people. Could you address that? Is it a major issue? I remember asking the Minister of Amerindian Affairs about this issue, especially with regards to women being sexually abused by leaders. And it was said that while there may be cases, she was not told of such abuses taking place. Do you see this happening on the ground where leaders abuse their powers?
I don't want to link the abuse of powers with sexual abuse or domestic violence. I don't want to link that.
Okay.
But there are instances of, there have been many, where there are cases of domestic violence. Women are suffering. Now with social media, some people are very willing to post their experiences there, so you see that. But there are also cases of, and there are reports that have pointed to this, there are also cases of child sexual abuse as well, right? Other forms of abuse, rape. Quite a few of them go unpunished because the system does not cater for. There are so many things. Say, for example, a woman is suffering domestic violence and she lives within a community. There is no safe house, literally in all of these communities, to go and say, hey, I can seek refuge in this place here, away from the person who is beating me or the person who is carrying out the violence. There's no safe place there, right? And then you do have cases sometimes of where the perpetrator pays off the law enforcement official, right? You hear it. I can't give you because one of the law officials say, oh, well, if you find that, come bring the evidence. I can't give you evidence. But people have said, we've done this. And therefore, people are reluctant sometimes to go to these officials because they know nothing will be done out of it. We do have cases too of where the perpetrators are forgiven by their spouses and the rest of it. That's all part of it. But there are cases, there are these social problems faced by the communities, and Baramita is a case. I think Baramita came up at the recent National Tushaus Council conference that's taking place. It was mentioned, and if I remember correctly, the comment was that we hear what you're saying. Baramita has been an issue for decades, and you should have been hearing 2 decades ago, and you should have been doing something 2 decades ago about Barometer, where there is violence that being faced by the community in different ways. And there's so many social issues that needs to be addressed.
Mr. Hastings, is police brutality still a major issue in indigenous communities? Or does it happen?
Well, I really cannot say much on that, but I can say that supporting what Jean has just said about abuse in villages, I know that during my tenure as a Tushao, I made some reports to the station, the police stations, but I can safely say that a lot of those did not really get any kind of justice done to the victims, but a lot of cases are like that. Our duty as a Tushao is to report the matter when we become aware of that, and then the police would have to do their investigations or whatever, and try to make sure that the victims get their justice. But as she rightly said, many times that is not done. And so, yes, as I said, that there's a lot of substance abuse, and because of that, we're seeing increase of violence, domestic violence. Yeah.
If I may add a little bit to that, because there was the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues recently held during April and May of this year, and the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs had a delegation there, which included the National Tushaus Council, and that is good that you can have representation at the highest level. The APA was there as well. But it was black and white in terms of the presentation of what really is the situation in Guyana, because on one hand, you can get if you totally believe what's presented by one group, you think everything is well and everything is nice when it comes to domestic violence and the rest of it. And we were recently again in front of the UN CERD, I think it is, I may be a bit incorrect there, for our periodic report as well. And you get a feeling that everything is fine. We have to acknowledge that we have problems. We have to acknowledge that we have to do something about these problems. Even if we are doing something, it's fine to say that we have taken steps here, there, but we're 40% on the way, we're 60% on the way. We have to acknowledge that we haven't reached where we're going yet, and we just should not hide those facts.
What would be your recommendations with regards to taking all the challenges? Amendments, when you do it, because of the evolving nature, it's a very dynamic world we're in. But present day, considering the challenges, considering the loopholes in the current legislation, considering what we've all discussed this evening, what would be some of the key proposals you would submit to government or to the parliament with regards to amending the legislation? And I know they've been called for it to be revamped, if I'm correct. But help me understand, what are some of the proposals? What are you telling the government?
There's so many. One of the first things that I would want to point out is the right to self-determination. And some have taken it to say, you're talking about a state within a state. That's not true. We are talking about the right of our people to make decisions, to make informed decisions, to be given time to make decisions for the benefit of their communities, not to be intimidated, not to be harassed, not to be bullied, not to be lied about. We want the right to freely make those decisions and make those recommendations and have a space at the table, at the largest table, at the national table, to make those recommendations, to be heard, and for them to be implemented. That would be one of the first things that I would want to see being observed. And the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People talk about this. And we have acceded to that declaration, as much as it's not law in the sense that we are also reminded it carries a lot of value in terms of what, as a country, we could do to improve the conditions of our indigenous peoples. The right to self-determination being really practiced by our communities. That would be one recommendation that I would touch.
Mr. Hastings, one other recommendation. What would you put on the table?
Well, I would be very happy if the UN DRIP that the government would have endorsed become part of the Amerindian Act, because a lot of articles there would guarantee our rights, what we're talking about. So if that is done, I think that we would be in a better position.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned the National Tushaus Council Conference, or the National Tushaus Conference, which was held recently. Now, the APA was locked out. Could you confirm if that's true?
I wouldn't say the APA was locked out. I would say individuals were not granted permission, accreditation for various reasons. I don't know what. A few, in fact, three of our staff members, and even because their staff, that was highlighted by a leading member of the National Tushaus Council, three of our staff members on day one gained access. They got a badge and they were able to sit through. They turned up the next day and their badges were taken away, and that was it. And then others turned up, did not get access in the same way, were told different things, and eventually left and did not. I think on the second day after the others turned up and were turned back, we didn't bother to go have access to the building anymore. I know it was not unique to the APA, and I can't say it was taken as a position against the organization, but our members were indeed not allowed to, some of our members were not allowed to go, and then badges were taken away on the second day, badges that were obtained on the first day. So I see it as poor planning. Poor planning because we did not know that accreditation was needed. We've gone to Tushaus conferences year in, year out, and this was never a requirement, and nothing was publicly put out there to say, hey, if you're coming, you need accreditation. And it's funny because the persons who we were told, who our staff was told, needed to give accreditation on a very busy morning on the opening of the Tushaus conference, were the people who should be cheering and sitting there at the top and welcoming other people. How can you be giving accreditation in the morning at that time when you're supposed to be performing official functions as well? So that doesn't make sense, you know? Yeah.
How do you see the platform? It's an occasion where hundreds of Tushaus from all parts of the country assemble in the city to really hammer out issues. How important is that platform to highlight the issues affecting indigenous communities? And secondly, what would you say? Are you pleased with the performance of the NTC, the council itself? So first, the importance of the platform and what it brings to the table, but also the performance of the council itself. Are you satisfied?
Yeah, so two things. The National Tushaus Council actually was promoted largely in legislation by the APA. Right? When I sat on the Constitution Reform Commission and during the process of the revision of the Amerindian Act, the National Tushaus Council as a body did not really exist as such. It existed in people's mind because they wanted to have a national body. So we took that seed of wanting a national body, and therefore, as legislative reform and so took place, the National Tushaus Council came into being, but the APA was largely responsible for bringing leaders together, for leaders determining terms of reference for the operation of the council and so forth. And the whole idea around that was that it be another voice, because the APA was operating as a non-governmental organization, and we recognize the importance of having the elected leadership of the communities, having a space, you mentioned the word platform, having a platform to be able to raise issues as well. So our work in terms of pushing and promoting for the establishment of the National Tushaus Council was exactly that. It didn't have the name the National Tushaus Council at that time, it evolved. But the idea was to have that platform where indigenous communities, as a collective, could independently raise concerns, but not only concerns, make recommendations, including for having indigenous cultures a vibrant aspect of Guyanese way of life continue to be maintained and preserved. So, yeah, there were issues that the communities have had to deal with, but there are also other aspirations that the Tushaus Council could be focusing. It was never one to be politically influenced. You have to talk to politicians, that's for real, because those are the people who are at the top there in many instances. So you have to talk to them, you have to interact with them, but it was never one to be influenced by. And I think a good functioning Tushaus Council would be one where the leaders are given space, or they take the reins and give themselves the space to meet regionally and then nationally as well, discuss their issues, see how they want to move forward, and present these to the government as equals.
What would you say is the state? How would you describe the relationship between indigenous communities in Guyana and the state? Or you simply can't paint it with a single brush?
I can't paint it with a single brush, but I wouldn't want to answer for communities. I can attempt to do a brief analysis of my experience and what I see. And what I see, especially coming out of the recent Tushaus conference, is a lot of control by the government in agenda making, in presence and so forth. I see a lot of that in control um, by, by the government. I also know that the APA has faced its own share of misinformation, including by government officials in communities about the work that we do, according to them, about the millions that we have and the millions that we may spend. So there has been information on the work of the APA in communities. I know our communities would like to have a good relationship with the government, but not one based on fear and intimidation and some of the things that some of them do experience at times.
Mr. Hastings, early in your presentation, you spoke about the challenges in accessing finance. You spoke about how some communities have turned to the extractive industries because they need funding. A lot do farming. The majority, you said, engage in farming. Now, the government, under the LCDS 2030 program, would have issued billions of dollars. In 2024, I think it was well over $3 billion to more than 230 indigenous communities across this land. What's your thought on the initiative? And do you see the indigenous communities utilizing the funding to execute whatever project they came up with? And do you see government dictating to them what it should be used for?
Well, I think it's a good initiative, even though I didn't go well at the beginning. Remember, I know there was an issue with not having proper consultation at the beginning, but since we're already into it, I mean, a lot of the villages have accepted the 15% that is being offered, and so yes, the people would have made their own plans on what projects or activities that they would execute with these monies. But as it is right now, it is too early for us to say that people are benefiting. As it is now, is that it's only those persons who are implementing the projects that are the direct beneficiaries of the funds. that is being received by the village. So that's a kind of little issue in the village right now that I'm aware of. I mean, for my village, that knowing my people there, and so that is where we are. Um, I did mention that at the inception, um, it was like that. You know, people were saying that the government was dictating to us what they must do and what they must not do, but because of people speaking out, I think that have changed. So people are in a position where they can freely identify projects and execute them by themselves. So I don't want to stray from your question, but just want to share my opinion about NTC and how it is functioning. It might be worthy to know that I've been at Tusha for 12 years. I was an executive member of NTC. And so our people's vision is that they would like NTC to be independent. But the problem is that because it is funded by the government, they really don't have any choice. But we've been trying to make our leaders aware that we have to, you know, look into areas where we can get funds. We have to be more demanding because it is not the government's money. It is the resources that belongs to every citizen of the country, and we feel that we have a right to that. So if a certain portion of money can be allocated to carry the functions of NTC, I mean, we can go a great way, but it is not being like that. And I would say that where NTC is right now, it is being politicized. And I was an executive member during the term when Nicholas Fredericks was at Tushao and Lennox Schumann. Mr. Lennox Schumann was the vice Tushao. At that time, because of the issues of transparency and accountability that were raised, I remember we recommended that in all fairness, we should invite people. It's no secret. Whatever is being done there is no secret. It should be open. But as I see things happening right now is that some media operatives, they're being denied entry, and even indigenous people now, they don't want to allow them to enter these meetings. And it is not nice to me because the government has a slogan about one Guyana and how it is very important for us to unite. If we don't have these inclusive discussions, you know, we will not achieve that goal. So everybody has to be involved. All the indigenous people, all the indigenous peoples organizations should have a role to play in these discussions. And so I feel that even though we as Amerindian People Organization, we are being labeled anti-development or whatever, I mean, sometimes I feel bad about it, but sometimes I'm encouraged because if you're not doing anything good, nobody would mention anything about you. But it's because of the work that we're doing, I feel that's why people are not too happy about our work. But the work that we are doing, the advocacy work that we are doing, is for the betterment of our people, our indigenous people. And so that is where I see NTC, and I think that leaders should really try to address that because if it would continue that way, we wouldn't have this kind of freedom to listen from other persons. We may have different opinions, but we should have some kind of respect.
Now, you've spoken about being accused of being anti-development. You're against development. Now, the President Irfan Ali, in the past, would have said that the APA is an operative of the opposition. It's politically biased and is really carrying out the work of the opposition. What's your take on that? I'll start with you, Mr. Hastings.
Well, I would say that I speak for myself personally, and from what I have observed, I would say that's a lie because it is just because we speak what we believe should be in the best interest of our people when we know that our leaders, because maybe of not having good information, would make wrong decisions, we would speak up about that. And so I think that is why we are labeled anti-development. And they would say things like that. We would like to stop funding, but it is not like that. It is just this talk that we made was about the whole process, how things went. And even though we try to highlight that to the people, they just keep it there. Yeah.
Okay, and Ms. LaRose, what's your take on the accusation?
That, the APA is not anti-government. The APA is not the opposition. The APA's members have the right to align to any political party of their choice. We encourage our members in that regard, and we ask them to think wisely in terms of when they're going in that direction, why it is that they are taking certain political lines. We've never stopped a member from aligning politically. They have that right under the Constitution. As an organization, the APA cannot, does not, has not, and will not align politically. We do have members across all the different political parties. So any government official, and most recently again at the Tushau's conference, you hear we will campaign with the opposition. Somebody's making up information. And why are they making up this kind of information to tell the communities? I don't know. But the AP will not campaign. The AP has never done that with any political party. What we would do is urge the government, the current government in power, to listen to the genuine concerns of indigenous communities. Stop talking so much and give our communities the real time. Do not intimidate our people in talking. And hear what their issues of concerns are, hear what their aspirations are, make note of those, put them somewhere for future action, but let our people have the true voice to talk, and not label people who has a different opinion as anti-government and as political and whatever other labels you want to attribute.
Now, closing remarks as we wrap up tonight's program. I'll start with you, Mr. Hastings, as the president of the APA. What you'd like to tell young indigenous people out there, the older folks, what you'd like to say to government about the challenges facing indigenous people?
I would like to say that we still have a far way to go. We are not there as yet, as I mentioned earlier. And so we don't need to be afraid. We need to be brave enough to make demands so that our people can live better lives in the future. And they need to visualize things. They need to be leaders of vision and not be sidetracked by these monetary benefits. That's just for a time, but they need to think more than that. And so we still have the issues that were raised many, many years ago. The land issue is still a problem. It is time that it is solved so that we can have full control of our lands, so that we can better monitor what is happening on these lands, so that our people can have better communities and live a happy life. Yeah, thank you.
I would like to say that a lot of monies have been going to indigenous communities recently. We've never had that amount of money going into our communities before. They're very necessary because we've been left so far behind with infrastructure and other things that money can bring to communities. I don't want us to see that being left, policies and legislation being left behind, that money is a distraction, that we really need to have those systems in place, that we need to have protections for our land rights, that we need to have various protections in various ways. And these can only happen if there are policies in place and if they are legislated. And there's one more message I'd like to say, that the Amerindian Peoples Association and most indigenous peoples that I know, because I can't speak on behalf of all of them, would respect the integrity of Guyana's border.
And also, I know I said it was my last question, but you'll forgive me for that. But an important topic as we wrap up tonight's program, the issue of our oil and gas or resources. How do you see Indigenous people playing a role in that? And then you could also elaborate about the border issue. Help me understand what are some of the challenges Indigenous people face in those border communities as we wrap up? I know those are two big questions.
Oil and gas, wow. There's so much that our communities still have to understand when it comes to oil and gas. Our natural resources fund. Yeah. What does that mean for Guyana? What does that mean for Indigenous people's development? How can we benefit? We know the circumstances under which it was passed, right? But there's a lot that our communities don't know, and there are very technical issues as well. We do know, and that's a fear that some of the communities have, that if there's an oil spill, how can this affect our livelihood? I am from Santa Rosa Village in Region 1. We're a coastal community. We depend on the sea and the river, but largely on the ocean out there, for the fish that come to our communities to make our kadakura on a daily basis. You know, if we are not to get our regular supply of sea fish, what happens to our community? And we do feel the squeeze at times because there's the season, there's the rainy season, there's so many things that affect it. But if we have a spill, then that can carry major implications for our communities as well. So I think there's a need for a lot of education, and I think there's a need for a lot of participation in decision making as well by our communities.
And the issue of communities along our borders, especially with Venezuela. Just briefly, what's the situation on the ground? I know there are a lot of Venezuelan migrants also in those communities. How are they coping? The Guyanese as well.
You know, December 2024, when there was that referendum, was a very unsettling period for border communities because you had our communities being very unsure as to what this means, what could happen. And I am certain that around this time, with that, with the elections pending as well, that our communities are wondering, like, what does this mean for us as well? Not having enough information, sometimes people can speculate. Right? So we need to have the right type of information. What is the government doing to support our communities? What is the government doing in relation to our border issue? What are potential actions that can happen should A, B, C, or D happen? You know, what are those potential actions that can happen within our communities as well? We feel it for the people who have been suffering as well under the harsh conditions that Venezuela is existing right now. Not having a job, not having an income to feed your family, not having an income to do certain things that you're accustomed to, can be very difficult for people. And some of those very people have moved over here, including some of our indigenous people who went over to Venezuela in the 80s when things were not so good in Guyana. Some of them have returned, and they have a right to return here. They have a right to security just as the rest of us. That does not, however, take away from the fact that we want security on our border. We want to feel safe in our lands. We want to be respected as Indigenous peoples within our own territory, and we want to be respected as Indigenous peoples within Guyana's territory. And as I said earlier, we respect the integrity of our nationhood and the borders that we have.
Now, I'll definitely have to bring back the APA because I have one other questions, but I know the viewers wouldn't mind. Now, the government would have also issued more than 200 gun licenses. Tell me about that. What's your take on it, Mr. Hastings?
Well, I would say that it is good, but at the same time, everything has good and bad. I was made to understand that the minute you get to hold a license, you're no longer a civilian, and they would see you as an enemy anytime in the event like to have a war, and so that is the danger that I would see. So I know that a lot of persons would have applied to secure their farms or for the protection, but a lot of them were denied. But now it's a mango season. That's what I can say. And so that is where they are. But I'm happy that the applicants are granted. So that I am only hoping that they would put it to good use because of the issues that we hear, even in this country here, persons who have firearm license, they abuse their families and this and this and that. And so I hope that that would not happen with our people. Yeah.
It is very necessary in some cases to have protection because you have the wild animals literally raising through some people's farm. I know that we don't have a huge farm, but we have crops that we grow, and we are constantly facing the animals eating out whatever they can. So there is need for some sort of measures to guard against these pests, sometimes who is our food as well, but we can't eat every as fast as they multiply. Yeah. So it's important for those and other reasons. It has to be used wisely. It has to be used wisely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hastings and Mrs. Jean LaRose. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Sources. I've been your host, Svetlana Marshall.